Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I guess we'll get started. So I kind of wanted to start off by talking about why mental health and why, for me, this is a really important topic, and some of the reasons why the Student Union did some research on mental health. Just to take it a bit back, and it's something a bit personal, mental health is not really something that we speak about in my community and where I'm from. You don't talk about it in my family. You don't ask for help. You don't complain. In my community, you're taught from a young age that, you're growing up in a world that is working against you. So you must work extra hard and push yourself to reach your goals. And with that comes a lot of baggage and a lot of challenges and a lot of pressure. So when I started university, I carried that baggage with me. I worked really hard. I tried to figure it all out by myself. And continued like this for 3 years during my undergrad course. But during those years, my friends and I would tend to joke about mental health and well-being and say that it wasn't really great. Comedy and laughter would be our coping mechanism. And there wasn't really a conversation around actually seeking help when we needed it. And when we tried to bring up the topic of mental health and why we wouldn't, we would laugh about it and would say, well, I'm Muslim and I'm of color. What would a white person know about my struggles? How would they understand what I'm going through? So we all expressed, how we didn't really feel comfortable seeking help and going to our mental health services for different issues, one being prevent, for an example. And there was one friend, I remember there was one friend that actually did try to seek help, and the waiting time was really long. And at that time, she was like, what's the point then if I'm going to have to wait months to actually see someone? But over the years, during my undergrad and postgrad, I paid attention to the attitude that students from BAME backgrounds, BAME communities had towards the services, conversations with my friend and peers. And I tend to ask questions to find out how they perceived perceive the mental health services and whether it's something they would go to. The one thing that struck to me was the idea that because a student is of color or because they are from a particular religion, they felt they couldn't approach the services. So for this reason, I ran for student officer. I was a VP community and wellbeing, and one of my priorities was mental health because I really wanted to explore some of those challenges. And out of that came this idea of our services need to be more culturally competent and what that means and how that may look like. But then the pandemic hit and everything went upside down. And we've all experienced how the pandemic really hit everyone. But then I realized that this work was even more important now, more than ever. During the academic year of 2020-21, when I was a VP Community and Wellbeing, my role somehow changed from the traditional representation role to more of a supporting role. And I say this because I remember my inbox every single day would be filled with students asking for support, telling me how bad their mental health was, telling me how COVID has impacted them, telling me their stories. Students were desperate for help. They needed guidance, and a lot of them didn't know where to go, so they tend to come to the Students' Union. And it was definitely overwhelming for a lot of us, for staff as well, but it told me something about students not knowing where to go, and I think there was something for us to look into when it came to signposting and awareness. But it also told me that mental health was going to be a topic that we're going to continue having for long after COVID passes, and actually we're not going to truly understand the impact of COVID until we've come out of it. Then we'll actually understand how it's impacted students. So I wanted to do some work to understand how students experience mental health, but in particular I wanted to understand the experiences of BAME students. So just some background, the majority of UK students at City are from BAME backgrounds, with only 34% of City students identifying as white. And there are a lot of reasons why so many students are disengaged from mental health services or support One being lack of understanding, fear of prejudice and racism, and poor trust in confidentiality. And actually, we're going to see how some of this has played out into the research and report that we conducted at the Students' Union. So in 2020, before I started my role, we made a report, we developed a report which showed that the majority of BAME students who completed the survey felt isolated from others during their time at university. And this was before the pandemic, or just as soon as the pandemic started. But a lot of our students did see that the counselling mental health services was something that they would go to for support. However, the usage was very low. So in 2021, we explored some of the barriers faced by BAME students when accessing the counselling mental health services. I just want to say that the term BAME is mostly, I don't really like the term, just to say, but it is mostly commonly used in the UK, where it embraces a variety of different cultures and background. And it's being used by, we all know it's being used by politicians and academics and different workplaces when talking about diversity, inclusion, and to describe anyone who's non-white, essentially. But as a union, we've decided to use the term BAME, acknowledging its limitations, and that the experiences of ethnic minorities differ from one another. But for the purpose of this research, we decided to use this term. But I just thought it would be good to make that disclaimer. So some of the findings that we found, actually, when we conducted our research was there was a lack of awareness and visibility of the service. People found it very difficult to find the service online and on site, and long application process. Actually, if I'm a student and I'm really struggling, I just need to see someone. If the application to see someone is very long, I'm probably going to be turned away. So that was something that a lot of our students came back with. But also, a lot of students didn't actually know what type of support they needed. And so I guess there was a space there to develop some sort of understanding about the different services, what type of support is available to students, and therefore making informed decisions. And also confidentiality concerns, online service as a barrier when raising family issues at home. And this was, just so everyone knows, we did this during COVID. So a lot of the findings here were, students experiencing students telling us about their experiences of the mental health services and mental health generally during COVID. Online service came up a lot because a lot of students felt that they couldn't raise family issues, or they couldn't talk about things that they don't feel comfortable talking about in their family home. And actually, this was a problem for some students who were in a in a home with so many family members. Here it was talking about the flexibility. Some students actually love online services or online, accessing help online. Some people prefer in person, but actually that flexibility wasn't there during COVID. So a lot of people found that as a barrier to accessing support. But also stigma to get mental health support, students not feeling comfortable to use in service. And this is something that I guess we would see, as I was trying to mention earlier, in our community or in so many different communities, mental health is not really something that you talk about. There's a stigma around it, and there continues to be a stigma when it comes to mental health. So again, that there was something on empowering students, educating students, but also understanding our limitations as well as a university, as a service, that we can't change the world, but there is definitely something that we can do around educating and empowering students to seek help. So 91% of our students agreed that they would benefit from a culturally responsive mental health and counselling service. A culturally responsive service was described as a service that is relatable to all minorities. And students suggested that one way to do this was having counsellors who have similar lived experiences and more diverse staff to represent different students. So the majority of students believe that it will be easy to communicate with and be understood by counsellors of the same ethnic and racial background, and that it would improve the quality of the support that they receive. one student said that it makes me realize I may need mental health support because culturally we are raised to believe we can handle life as normal. When seeking counselling, if given the opportunity, 31% of students said that they would specifically request a counsellor from the same ethnic and cultural background as them. One student said that there are socioeconomic pressures we experience in the BAME community, which it seems our non-BAME colleagues know little about. For example, there is generally a pressure on us to do well in order to support parents and other family members. That in itself is a very real and difficult pressure to adjust to, i.e. being the financial future of your wider family, alongside trying to do well in a course where you have few, no close relatives who have experienced higher education and or the professional job market in the UK. So you are also always at a disadvantage when it comes to planning what to do in your course. So this was the experience of one student. And another student said that white counsellors don't get the cultural importance of some of the issues I brought up. Having to explain an issue to her because she didn't understand what I was talking about really took out time when I'm supposed to be using that hour to unpack the things I needed to deal with. My Black therapist has been really helpful for the past couple of months in helping work through stress of school and other issues I needed help with. We had an easy time building a connection, and our sessions are free of microaggressions. So it was emphasized that counsellors also need to have a wide knowledge of LGBTQI+ issues, different faith, and need to be culturally sensitive in order to emphasize with students. And also, students needed to know that those staff have this knowledge in order for them to feel that they can access it. So it's not just about them having it, it's about also students knowing that they have it. It is what our students told us. Moving on, students consider that counselling should be flexible and accessible services that caters to student lecture timetables for students who may require support over a number of years and accommodate students who may need support on short notice. And this kind of goes back to my point on if I just needed to talk to someone, if I needed help and the application process is really long, I'm probably not going to go and seek that help. And also this includes having access to support during the night or late hours. And students suggested that more engagement and awareness was needed of the mental health services available through regular leaflets, posters, social media posts. They also considered a need for greater visibility and communication via Moodle, Student Hub, and those different sort of outlets that students use. It was suggested that greater promotion around well-being, positive mental health, and support services was needed at the start of each term and at the end of each term as well, and the need to destigmatize access mental health services to students, so students are more comfortable accessing the support they needed. So this was, I guess, the findings of our mental health survey that we did that focused on the experience of BAME students. But I wanted to kind of also talk about the impact of COVID-19 on students on a national level. And I know earlier there was mention of the survey that NUS did. So there, from my perspective, there are, I guess, 4 things, and there's probably more. But in terms of different themes, loneliness and isolation seems to be something that keeps coming up. During COVID, students were alone, they were isolated. Some students, I guess in particular international students, living in halls, student accommodation, weren't able to interact with people. A lot of international students, came to the country, some of them weren't able to go back, no family, no friends, and therefore that loneliness and isolation was something real for a lot of students. In terms of international students as well, I guess lack of financial support. And I say this because, in my view, we need to take mental health in a holistic, we need to take a holistic approach when it comes to mental health and appreciate that so many different things can affect someone's mental health. So one being, lack of financial support. And actually we saw during COVID how there were lines of students outside food banks and in particular international students, because they had no financial support, and that really does impact your mental health. So that was definitely something that international students in particular faced and impacted them. Anxiety and depression, again, is a theme that we see time and time again coming when it comes to student mental health. The worry and stress, and actually the survey that NUS conducted found that students weren't worried about them catching COVID, they were worried about their families, and they're worried about other people catching COVID. So that was, a really worrying time. Students losing loved ones, students with health issues, caring responsibilities, all those things contributed to anxiety and depression, but also just the unknown, not knowing what's going on, not knowing if you're going to proceed or move on to your next year, not knowing what's happening. All of that really played into anxiety. And marginalized groups, and the reason I said this because the survey conducted by NUS found that marginalized groups, in particular disabled students and LGBTQ plus students, were disproportionately affected by COVID-19, and their mental health was really, really affected as a result of that. So just some quotes that students have said. My online lectures have placed me in virtual isolation. As I move to a new area, knowing no one, I am in a self-contained flat, so useless. I shop for food or check for postal deliveries. I no longer see anyone. Another student said that my anxiety and depression has taken a turn for the worse, so I'm having more trouble sleeping and studying. While I'm staying on top of my work to the best of my ability and I'm carrying on, I miss live music and making music with friends. I miss socializing, and I miss seeing my family on a regular basis. Some days, the stress of my degree on top of the stress caused by COVID can be unbearable. Another student said that loneliness, social isolation, and staying at home the whole day caused me more stress, anxiety, sudden drops of self-esteem, and loss of confidence. That being said, and earlier in the podcast, there was mention of over 50% of students said that their mental health is worse as a result of the pandemic. Only 20% of students nationally have sought mental health support, and 29% of those students who have indicated only 29% of those students who have indicated that their mental health is worse have sought support. So we can see a really, really low take up, and this is quite worrying. So it raises questions of how do students deal with it? What is going on with these students? How have they progressed in their education? So that's very low numbers on a national level. Mental health today, and as I said earlier, I think only once we move on from sort of COVID will we actually understand the real effects of it. But I can see two things, at least in the near future, going to have an even more impact on student mental health as a result of COVID. And one being the cost of living crisis, rent, financial needs and support. That is going to be on a lot of students' minds. For an example, at City University, we know that a lot of our students are commuter students. A lot of our students have part-time jobs. And there is going to, this is going to play on every student's mind, how they're going to support themselves, how they're going to support their families if they have caring responsibilities. So this is going to, I think, even more so impact students' mental health as a result of COVID and the wider sort of implications. And again, loneliness, social anxiety, community. I have two brothers who are in university now. They started university, when the pandemic started. And I can actually see how they have changed, how, 2 years on, this is their second year in uni, they haven't been to uni as much, they don't have friends, they're twins, so they're always together, which is, I guess, is a good thing, but they don't have any friends in their university, they don't like to go to university, all their lectures are online, so they're just, in their room listening or, doing their lectures. And I think that's going to impact students even more, and I think we're going to, not just in university, even after they leave university, how they interact with wider society, and just those soft skills that we need for employment, etc. That's going to be missing for a lot of our students who experienced pandemic whilst they were students. So again, moving on to recommendations, because I don't just want to talk about the bad things, but I think there is a lot of scope to do things. And I've sort of split recommendations into two things. So institutionally, and then the next slide is sort of a national, what we can do nationally. So institutionally, mental health charter. I think that's the very least any institution can do is sign up to the mental health charter. I know at City we're going to be signing up very soon, which is absolutely great. Review and improve accessibility. And with that, student consultation needs to be integral to that process. We can't talk about being student-friendly or improving accessibility if we don't actually involve students and consult with students. And this could be very, very small things like, making the services more accessible, on the website. It could be reviewing our application processes, making it more streamlined, making it more student-friendly. But yeah, students need to be, I think, at the heart of that. Review the diversity of the wellbeing team. And actually, I wrote the wellbeing team, but I think reviewing the diversity of all support services is really important. And one thing I do want to say is I don't think mental health falls just on the mental health services. It's not the responsibility of the mental health services alone. It's everyone's responsibility. But we do need to reserve spaces for more, staff of colour. But also it could be ensuring that, for an example, pictures of staff are on the website so students know what they're signing up to, and there is choice that are available for them. Embedding well-being into the curriculum, and we need to, I guess, what I realise is a lot of students tend to seek help once they're in crisis, and actually what we don't want is for students to end up in a crisis mode. So educating students on well-being, mental health, I think is really important, and there are so many ways that we can embed it into the curriculum, and collaborative well-being campaign with the Students' Union, for an example, or different services, the careers team, etc. I think that is really important. But again, it's not just, it's also looking at, for an example, academics, and ensuring that personal tutors have the necessary training that they need in order to support students. Because one thing that we did find is after friends and family, students tend to go to their personal tutors as a first point of contact before being signposted to the mental health services. On a national level, I guess we do need to take a holistic approach towards well-being and mental health. We can't just look at mental health as an isolated thing. Mental health affects every single aspect of a student's journey. It impacts how the way they engage with their education, it impacts their progression, it impacts everything. So we do need to take a holistic approach towards that. Take into consideration the cost of living crisis, and we know this is going to be something that is going to be in every single student's mind. There needs to be calls for increased hardship funds for students. Students come to university to study, not to worry about how they're going to provide, a meal for their family, etc. So we need to create the conditions and the environment for students to be able to thrive in university. And I think one way to do that is by increasing hardship funds for students. Develop race, disability, LGBTQ+, and trauma-centered services. And I think someone will talk about taking, sort of a holistic approach towards that. We can't just look at one thing, I guess, in isolation. And the last thing is staff mental health. And one thing I will say is, and something that I genuinely do believe, is staff working conditions are student learning conditions. And it's not really something that we talk about when we talk about student mental health, but actually a lot of staff are overworked. They are also in a crisis, and we need to look at supporting our staff in order for our students to thrive and for them to not be impacted by that as well. So yeah, that's all for me. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shaima, for the great talk. Are there any questions? We have time for one or two. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm from ECL. I was really excited by one of your recommendations, which was to embed wellbeing into the curriculum. I'm an OT and I'm studying non-clinical interventions, and naturally I feel that would be one of the ways that we could achieve that. But I'm wondering, from your perspective and from the student voice, has there been any recommendations or ways in which students would value wellbeing being embedded into the curriculum from an education or a practical perspective?
Yeah, actually, it would be. Yeah, that's a really good question. So from the research that we've conducted, there hasn't really been any recommendation, but some of the conversations that we've had is actually something as simple as developing a module, a core module beginning of, that every student does beginning of every year, especially first year students, to be able to cope with some of the stress and the anxieties that naturally comes when starting a university, and therefore being able to develop resilience, I guess, in the face of university life. But yeah, just developing a module that can be taught, but also something that can be embedded on, softwares or, services like Moodle that every student goes to, that they can just refer back to whenever they need it. So it's, something to be taught, but also something for them to just go back and refer to whenever they need. I hope that answers your question.
Hi, myself Nida Bushra, and I'm a PhD scholar at City University. I would like to ask you that in your research you said that there are two factors that were contributing to poor mental health in student. Right, one is cost of living and another one was loneliness. So I would like to ask you, is academic stress was one of the cause? Because during COVID, like pandemic, the main reason was actually I did my research and I've seen that academic stress was like really very high during students, because all of a sudden they move on to online classes, right? And there were so many technology glitches and increased screen time and so much was going on. So what do you think? Academic stress was there or not?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Academic stress was definitely there. Actually, you're absolutely right. So everything was moved online. People, it's, different mode of learning. People are trying to get used to it, both students and staff. But also, I would say that some students didn't really necessarily have the means to study, at home. Again, like, they didn't have the right environment to study. They had, like, younger siblings who are also doing, studying online as well. So it was very difficult. But also digital poverty. This was real for some students. And
no, actually, I just want to know if something came into your research or not. Like, is it affecting mental health or not?
Yeah, no, definitely. It was definitely something that was mentioned. Yeah.
Thank you.